Quote, "A nation's culture resides in the hearts and in the soul of its people." End quote. Hey there again, this is Jonathan, and you're listening to Episode 4, Part 1 of The Equation. And today we're going to look at cultural influences on emotional freedom. We're inherently cultural mammals, which is why I wanted to start with a quote from Mr. Gandhi. Our souls and hearts are inextricably linked to our culture. Therefore, this is where the rubber meets the road as far as spirituality and social justice is concerned. I'm going to focus on the negative impacts of our society, but that's not to say that everything about our culture is terrible. It's just that if you look at the amount of violence, drug abuse, and general escapism that occurs in the U.S., it's safe to say that many of us are suffering really bad. Okay, I've got an unoriginal joke for you. One fish asks another, "How's the water?" The other fish replies, "What the hell is water?" The point? It's easy to forget that what surrounds you is only normal because it's what you know. This is especially true when you come from a nation-state, a totally made-up way of organizing people, in an increasingly globalized world. It's really hard to see that we're all swimming around in a particular culture that is always in flux. Our culture is not somehow a natural extension of what it means to be human, but rather a particular expression of this, warts and all. And the beauty of this is that it can change, and hopefully for the better. There are any number of different cultural aspects that could be examined, but I have chosen the ones that to me stick out to be the most influential for aiding in suffering. The first cultural roadblock I like to look at is the notion of original sin and its cousin, being a good person. No matter if you say you're an atheist, agnostic, or any other religion or faith, if you are a member of the good old US of A, you are influenced by Christian values. Our founding fathers came from Christian backgrounds, so therefore our very nationalistic foundations are imbued with these notions. In my own example, for the longest time I thought I was an atheist. I consciously believed in my heart of hearts that I was an atheist, when in actuality I was just suffering from the illusion that I was one. I was absolutely terrified that there was a God is watching you God, a judgmental God. Christian cultural dominance infuses in our psyches that we need to fear ourselves. These values can have horrific negative effects on our emotional well-being, sadly. It infuses us with the notion that somehow part of us is evil, and we need to discipline this aspect of our souls when in actuality to be fully human is to be divine. To love and accept those dark parts of us, the greedy, selfish, egotistical, impatient, hateful parts of us, is what makes humans so incredibly wonderful. It's when we fear these in ourselves that the dysfunction arises, the gumming up of the works. And when we deny these parts in some sort of delusional state of goodness, this is when the shit hits the fan. In an attempt at being a good person, it is easy to deny the not-so-good parts of us. And if human history is any teacher, it's safe to assume that people who think they're good have done a whole lot of things that would be considered by most people to be pretty downright terrible. When we're able to acknowledge and examine those darker parts of ourselves in a non-judgmental, compassionate manner, we can begin to see their roots in suffering and to allow them to have less power over us. To say that someone is either good or bad is really doing a disservice to the beautiful complexities of the human species. We are so much more than simply good or bad, and this is a beautiful thing. And, keeping in line with what's going to be a running theme with my cultural analysis, this flat assessment of human character doesn't allow for a critical analysis of a culture that produces quote-unquote good and bad people. From a biological perspective, a more accurate take on humans is one of complex, beautifully flawed people trying to survive different social realities, one in which varying levels of suffering produce certain types of behavior that appear either more or less ethical. Our culture also has a very limited view of what it means to be human. We're basically supposed to be middle class, be part of a family unit that consists of a male-bodied father, a female-bodied mother, and around 2.5 kids. Retire, die. This does such a disservice to the beautiful diversity that exists within our nation. Due to a myriad of forces, the definition of what it means to be normal keeps narrowing to a point of where no one can actually be such a thing and still have a pulse. How many disorders are partially a byproduct of a terribly restrictive notion of what normal is supposed to be? Of an economic system that feeds off selling pathology in order to create clients to sell drugs to? Of an uninspiring labor system largely devoid of the soul-nourishing attributes that makes complex, fragile, yet resilient, beautiful spiritual mammals feel alive? Pathology caused by crushing internalized oppression. No matter your age, gender, sexuality, race, or class, you are capable of accomplishing anything you put your mind to. How much anxiety, quote-unquote disorder, is caused by living in a culture where everything has to be done yesterday? How much anxiety is the product of living in a culture intolerant, violent, towards the diverse expressions of sexuality? How much anxiety is a product of a lack of participation in art, which in itself is partly a product of an oppressive labor system? How much dis-ease is caused by a lack of connection with other human critters in the workplace in the name of productivity? How about if we language anxiety as suffering from experiencing a distorted perception to the complexities of time as a result of our culture's pathological association with it? Whew! Let me say that again. How about if we language anxiety as suffering from experiencing a distorted perception to the complexities of time as a result of our culture's pathological association with it? What if ADD was reframed as a hypersensitivity to external stimuli, or something else empowering to showcase the gift of diverse experience? What if it was more culturally accepted that ADD wasn't a deficiency in attention, just that attention needs shifted and nurtured for a more productive, vibrant relationship to life? One of the great illusions of Western culture is that there are sites where we're supposed to be really focused, such as at school. But life begs of us to always pay attention. It's all important. So how does creating all this pressure to perform in a specific site nurture suffering in the realm of paying attention, when actually the best way to focus is to relax and absorb all the incredibleness that life has to offer? What if depression was languaged as a brilliant critter suffering from a lack of perspective, ... for the moment? The for the moment part is key. For the current illusion the science of neurology accepts as truth is that you're hardwired and you're stuck with that hardwiring. Shucks. So if you have depression, it's because of your genetic makeup and all there is for you is a pill. Dead fucking wrong. Thankfully, this perception is changing with the study of neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. Just knowing this can have the magic effect of alleviating some of the symptoms of depression. The experience of depression is something you can work with, something that shifts and changes with time just like your own badass selves. But if you wake up each day with the same thoughts, performing the same repetitive tasks, then yeah, it's going to stick around for a long-ass moment. How about languaging paranoid schizophrenia as someone suffering from a severe break from being in the moment? Consider this. Paranoid schizophrenics in the United States possess similar genetic characteristics of shamans, people of high standing, worth, and authority in more indigenous cultures. Genetically predisposed? Well, technically, it is genetically predisposed when such beautiful diversity tragically collides with a pathological culture that doesn't embrace and nurture such diversity. Diversity is the foundation of life. Let's work to make our culture more tolerant of the many beautiful ways in which humans express their wonderful selves. Let's look at one last disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, or by its more common household name. Why should a disorder even have a household name? PTSD. At least this term recognizes some semblance of a historical event that occurred to produce the suffering that exists in the present. But they couldn't resist slapping the big D, the big disorder, on the end of it, as if our body's natural reaction to trauma is somehow a disorder, an expression of lack in a beautiful human critter. Okay, folks, here's the philosophy of this podcast in a nutshell. Heal the soldier suffering from PTS, and be fiercely critical of a society that produces so many suffering critters, and work to change the structures that aid in so much suffering. There you have it. As someone who has worked in the homeless population, I can tell you from direct experience that a large portion of them suffer from PTS. And what subject position do they inhabit? The female body homeless population is comprised mostly of beautiful mammals escaping domestic violence. For the male body demographic of homelessness, we have a large number of war veterans. So now I ask you, are these lazy people that are a suck on our resources? Or are they beautiful, complex, wonderful critters that are suffering terribly beyond my recognition? When we look at survival from a biological standpoint, we must look at it in terms of different social realities. Sometimes surviving violence means being homeless, or houseless as one person living on the streets described it to me. If this intrigues you and you feel called to action, how wonderful. Seek out organizations that act as compassionate allies for the homeless populations in your area. The Coalition on Homelessness is a great example of such an organization that exists in San Francisco. And this is just one of many that are scattered throughout this wonderful landmass considered at this historical point in time as the United States of America. Some people don't consider this to be the name of their particular land, and they are worth a listen to. Okay, I lied. Let's look at just one more. Manic depressive disorder. This diagnosis is especially close to my life due to my high-level moment. When I had my initial spiritual awakening, it knocked me on my ass. Literally. I fell to the floor and wept when I realized that love is all that matters. Why did it knock me on my ass? So I would fucking listen, that's why. I had to have a major shift in my consciousness in order for me to listen. I was so entrenched in my atheist, social Darwinist, sexist, racist, heterosexist, classic scientific worldview that it had to be a doozy of an experience to rip me from these mental constructs. So yeah, I needed rocked real hard to shake that shit, and so I got it. And up to that point in my life, it was the most beautiful thing that has ever happened to me. And when I came down the mountain, I became paranoid that I was manic depressive and therefore abnormal. A freak. Our culture provides very little space and resources to be able to deal with such experiences in a compassionate way, so I was left thinking that something was wrong with me. I was fortunate enough to participate in the most beautiful experience that could ever happen to a being on this planet. That is to be filled with the spirit, of the light, of the energy, chi, oneness, whatever the hell you want to call it. And due to our culture's propensity to pathologize anything that falls outside of its terribly narrow norm of what it means to be normal, and my inability to be critical of this cultural phenomenon, I proceeded to pathologize myself. Now, before I go any further, let me just say that I'm in no way saying that these disorders don't exist and that people don't suffer horribly from them. I just think we need to undertake a drastic shift in the causes of the suffering. That instead of people possessing some sort of lack in a pristine culture, that they are suffering, and said suffering looks different for beautifully different folks. And the solution isn't more and more drugs, although they can help people cope, but healing on a holistic level that includes healing both the cultural structures and its people. Part of my experience of falling down the mountain revolved around feeling like the alpha ego was the origin of oppression.